Welcome to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity. I'm Justine Toe.
And I'm Natasha Moore.
Well, a few years ago, there was a post that went viral on social media. It was called Why Generation Y Yuppies Are Unhappy. And it was from the site Wait, But Why. It went viral because clearly it struck a chord in its depiction of a generation of young people, those born in the late 70s to the mid-90s, who were raised to believe that they were uniquely special and therefore are destined for a really bright future. But Generation Y Yuppies are unhappy because their ambitious dreams were actually dashed once they faced cold, hard reality. So basically, this entitled generation, of which Natasha and I are a part, is increasingly finding itself quite unhappy, anxious and depressed. Does that sound familiar to you, Natasha?
Well, yes. I mean, this is actually a very funny article. I recommend it to people. Why Generation Y Yuppies Are Unhappy. It definitely resonated with me when I read it. I think it particularly picks up on the issue of expectations. So it contrasts our parents' generation, baby boomer kind of expectations were relatively low.
And modest. Yeah.
And then, they just kind of wanted the grass. They wanted for things to be okay.
Yep.
And there, because there was a period of prosperity, those expectations were exceeded and therefore they were a happier generation. Whereas their children, we've kind of been led to believe that we can do
everything
be
we want to be.
anything. And so we don't just want grass, we want like flowers and maybe unicorns
Castles.
and rainbows. Yeah. It really punctures this idea of self-esteem that's been a bit artificially inflated by the way that we've been educated. So it does offer a funny take on the question, but it is quite consistent with what we do now know about self-esteem, that if people are told that they're super special and that they can be whatever they like, and if that actually isn't a very realistic expectation, then that can set people up for a lot of unhappiness and dissatisfaction in the long run.
Well, we're going to talk to John Smith about this. He wears many hats. He's founded the welfare organisation Concern Australia, the Values for Life High School Seminar Program, and also the God Squad Christian Motorcycle Clubs. We will do a Life and Faith on that at one point. But today we're talking to John Smith as the author of Beyond the Myth of Self-Esteem, Finding Fulfillment. John, you've got quite an eclectic biography. What was it about self-esteem that first sparked your interest? Was it your work with young people?
Primarily it was because probably the greatest concentration for the last 40 years of my life has been going to high schools and universities, but I probably have spoken at about 4,000 high schools who were perhaps hundreds of thousands of teenage kids. And I've been following what was happening with young people, and we had been told, of course, that if we had certain things in place, that economically we were more stable, if there was a safety net for people at the bottom end of the stack, if we had more education, if we had sexual freedom and basic other freedoms in democracy, that people would be happier. And I became interested also in the academics who were working in departments on happiness as well. Those two things came together for me as I noticed that despite what should have been the outcomes of the improvement in democratic societies, that we in actual fact were seeing young people become more clinically depressed. That is, mental illness and depression that wasn't related to frontal lobe damage from accidents or bipolar disease or anything like that, but from what Seligman, the great psychologist, has, I think, argued well, is our emotional reactions to the messages that our culture is giving us and our inner capacity to be able to cope with those messages.
Well, how about we talk about those messages? You spend a great deal of your time in the book calling out what you call the myth of self-esteem. What is that myth and how does it send, I suppose, distorted messages about the self?
Well, it's not that I think we should be negative about ourselves necessarily, but I had thought of writing a more simple book with the first chapter on feeling bad when you're doing good, because there are some people whose conditioning in life causes them to never feel positive, even if they're actually living quite a successful and positive life. And then I thought I'd do a chapter on feeling bad about doing bad, because just as our nerve system warns us when we have problems with our organic substance, feelings of being down or feeling elated are often a reflection of the reality of our social or spiritual or whatever other aspect of life apart from the organic part. And then I thought I'd do a chapter on feeling good about doing good, because I certainly think that when you do good stuff in life and you succeed, you should feel good about that. I don't think that's arrogant. I don't think that's unhealthy. I think it's good as long as it is relative to the extent to which your life is good and is achieving. And then I thought I'd do a chapter on doing good however you feel, because there are many times in life where all sorts of external and internal factors will rob us of feeling good even when we are doing good stuff. And if we really believe in what we're doing, we just get on with it and don't let those feelings get in the way. By the end of the 90s, all of a sudden, you look in newspapers, magazines, journals, educational papers, and suddenly the term self-esteem could be seen in thousands of hits, whereas you'd hardly find it 10 years before. So I became aware that it was a well-popularised, well-disseminated movement, not just some sort of random idea. And that's why I called it the self-esteem movement, as distinct from a healthy, good sense of reality about how your life is being lived and what's happening around about you. So it was actually, strangely enough, calling you to be obsessively inward-looking for an outward response, and I don't believe that was accurate. And watching the level of clinical depression amongst young people massively increasing over the last few decades, almost commensurate with the popularity of this myth.
You've written that this cultural message that you can be whatever you want to be, that this can actually set people up for failure. Now, why is that? And could that be the reason why people are so depressed?
Well, even if you're in the sports arena, if you're going to try and do a high jump, then if you set the bar ridiculously too high for your physical capacity to jump it and you keep on trying, you become depressed because you just keep failing. And so even in sports like that, you have increments by which you increase your capacity and fulfill your desire to reach a certain height in competition. But you've got to set the thing realistically. You can't set the thing a metre higher than is physically possible to achieve. And I think that, if you're going to make, for instance, your appearance and beauty and all of that aspect to be part of giving your personality a good feeling, and you don't happen to be blessed with what our society says is a beautiful face or a beautiful body, what do? You're a bit overweight and you've got some organic problem that stops you from losing weight. And so you increasingly become sad and inward-looking and negative about yourself because you can't fulfill the false image that's given that this is the way every human being should be. And I think the one that really got to me was that young lass that went out in the sailboat and did that fantastic journey. And on the morning news, they kept on repeating her saying, this proves you can do whatever you want to do. But she was a girl, obviously, with the genetic inheritance that gave her that kind of drive, number one. She obviously had the physical capacity to fulfill it. She had friends in the sailing industry that had taught her from a little girl. And she had the financial backing to have the best high-tech equipment for her to take on this challenge at sea on her own. I couldn't have done that at any stage in my life.
So basically there are limits on everyone's life, and the idea that you can just simply do whatever you want, well, that this is not necessarily true for all of us.
Well, it's not true too, because your fulfilment in life is also in the context of economic circumstances, which country you live in, what your family and sibling and surrounding friendship network give you in terms of support. I mean, there are dozens of external factors over which you have no control that limit the extent you can succeed either in popularity or in financial gain or any of those things. I can't believe that people would even believe this nonsense.
If you've just joined us, you're listening to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity. We've been hearing from John Smith about the myth of self-esteem. Before we return to that interview, a few weeks back we had Colette Smart in the studio. She's a psychologist, an author, and a frequent media commentator on issues of teen well-being.
We specifically asked her to comment on the more recent suggestion that to talk of notions of sin and morality can actually threaten the self-esteem of teenagers. Here's what she had to say about that.
I have a problem with that idea because I think that just breeds more individualism, more individualistic type thinking, when we are too afraid to say to our teenagers, you've done something wrong, you need to grow, you need to change in this area. As human beings, we know that we're not perfect. And the wonderful part of the Christian message is that you actually have some hope in terms of being able to reach out to something bigger than yourself or someone bigger than yourself. And it's okay to not be perfect. I wouldn't say the Christian message makes you feel like a worm. It actually brings hope and healing. And so I think telling young people that they can never do anything wrong or that they don't sin at various points is more harmful to their self-worth, because they know that they do things wrong. And then once they do something wrong, there is hope in the Christian message for where to go for healing or go for forgiveness outside of yourself. If we relied just on ourselves for healing, I think we'd have a really big problem.
Let's think about the role of faith in nurturing a good sense of self-worth, because you prefer this term.
Yes.
How does it play a role?
The Oxford Handbook of Religion and Health actually says that they found that a positive relationship between religion, mental health and well-being is reported in 93% of their 45 studies that they've done. And I find that absolutely fascinating, because even a psychologist like Andrew Fuller has said when he's gone out into rural areas in Australia, he's found that children or teens who are connected into a youth group or a church actually don't struggle with their self-esteem issues and poor self-esteem as much. There seems to be a positive relationship or positive link between being involved in a church and having a faith and young people having a healthy self-worth. And I think that's because young people are connected in with a group that's encouraged to do positive activities. They're encouraged to think outside of themselves. That's one of the biggest issues that I see with young people and adults who struggle with self-worth. I often encourage them to go out and give in their community, practice thankfulness, because as soon as you take your eyes off of yourself, something seems to happen, which is very much part of a Christian message, would be looking outside of yourself. As soon as we start to do that, we don't notice our problems. Our problems seem to go into perspective. And so we're seeing that more and more in youth.
Back to our interview with John Smith, for he also had something quite similar to say on where self-worth might truly be found.
When I looked at Maslow, who said that self-actualization, looking for yourself, finding yourself and finding fulfillment for basic sense of need, was what would give you your best humanity. Frankl, another Jewish psychotherapist, he wrote quite the opposite when he wrote Man's Search for Meaning and the Unheard Cry for Meaning, because he said it's not self-actualization, it's self-transcendence. It's when something bigger than yourself captures you, and when you really feel in your heart something beyond the pain, beyond the people that don't believe you can do it, beyond the detractors, beyond your own weaknesses, you give yourself to a cause. And it's fascinating to see how we adore people. Everyone from Mother Teresa to Martin Luther King, whose speeches are probably the most famous speeches to this day, though it's decades since he died. These are people who were willing even to give their lives, if need be, for the service of others. And when you look at their lives fulfilled, lives with a sense of dignity and a sense of hope against all the hopelessness. So many of the great mystics and writers of poetry and hymns have expressed the kind of way in which they found a deep sense of human satisfaction and identity. Words like the hymn writer that said, "My will is not my own till I make it thine. If I would reach a monarch's throne, I must my crown resign." And that writer was saying that somehow, when he gave himself to a higher power and didn't see it was just about him, then he was able to find a sense of dignity and a sense of purpose that he couldn't find by simply looking inwardly and trying to make himself the captain of his own soul.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. Your book is Beyond the Myth of Self-Esteem. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity. For more on Christianity and modern life, go to publicchristianity.org.